There was a debate going on in my Facebook boxing group the other day about whether or not Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua and many of the other top heavyweights today would be successful in previous eras in heavyweight boxing, like in the 1990s or in the 1970s, etc. And one guy even went as far as saying that Joshua and Wilder would be top 20 contenders at best in the year 1993. Now, I don't know if the guy was trolling or not, or if that's what he genuinely believes. But what I can say is there are a lot of people out there who do genuinely believe that, who say things like Joshua and Wilder wouldn't even be journeymen back in the 90s. Well, a lot of you are probably sick of hearing me talk about the 1990s because that's all I talk about in a lot of my videos, it seems. I certainly go on long tangents about the 1990s quite frequently. Well, I first started watching boxing in the mid to late 80s, but it's not until the 90s that I really became hardcore into the sport. So the 90s really is my decade of expertise when it comes to boxing, because I was unhealthily, if that's even a word, fanatical about boxing in the 1990s. I was far more fanatical about boxing in general than I am today, back then. So I know this era very well, particularly the heavyweight division. And I can tell you for a fact that there were several heavyweight champions who are around in the 1990s who couldn't have laced Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder's boots. That's what I'm going to tell you right now as a fact. And let me go through it. Now, 1993, I'm going to take that as the first port of call because, as I say, this individual claimed that Wilder and Joshua would be top 20 at best in 93. No. Wilder and Joshua would be comfortably inside the top 10 in 93. 93 was not a particularly strong year in the heavyweight division. Mike Tyson was in prison. That's the first thing you have to know. Riddick Bowe, Lennox Lewis, and Evander Holyfield were at the top of the division. Below them, you had people like Tommy Morrison, Ray Mercer, an ancient George Foreman, Michael Moorer. People like that were on the ascendancy. In fact, was Moorer even heavyweight in 93? I can't remember now. I'll check in a second. In fact, let me check here by looking at Bert Cooper's record, because he lost to Michael Moorer before Moorer challenged for the heavyweight title. Let's have a look here. Holyfield fight. Okay, Michael Moorer. He fought Moorer in 92. So yeah, Moorer would have been a heavyweight contender in 93. But anyway, before we do that, this neatly segues into George Foreman. He was a contender in 93 and he won the world title for the second time in 94, knocking out Michael Moorer in, 10 rounds? They knocked out Michael Moorer. I forget the exact round it was now. Yeah, it was 10 rounds. So in 1993, George Foreman won the heavyweight title again. He was 45 years old. He was getting the absolute crap beat out of him for 9.5 rounds by Michael Moorer. And he managed to land one right hand. Well, there was a right hand before it and then a follow-up right hand which dropped Michael Moorer for the count. And he became the oldest heavyweight champion in history, and he still holds the record today. But George Foreman at 45 years old was not some kind of force of nature. He was not an exceptional heavyweight by the time he was 45. He was fat. He was painfully slow. He was extremely easy to hit. He'd been battered from pillar to post by Evander Holyfield, battered from pillar to post by Tommy Morrison, and he was getting battered from pillar to post by Michael Moorer. Remember, two of those guys that I've just mentioned were cruiserweights, and Tommy Morrison was essentially a pumped up cruiserweight. He said years later that if it wasn't for all the steroids he was doing, he would have been a cruiserweight. Okay, so you got 3 pumped up cruiserweights who beat the crap out of this old George Foreman. But one of them just happened to walk onto a big right hand, and I'm talking about Michael Moorer, obviously. And Michael Moorer was notorious for having a weak chin at heavyweight. Notorious for that. I'm telling you right now, there is no way on earth that Michael Moorer will be able to take a flush right hand from Deontay Wilder and remain conscious. Never going to happen. Or Anthony Joshua for that matter. So this man, a 45-year-old, out of shape, fat man who's easy to hit, who's slow as molasses, was world champion in 1994, the year after this guy's talking about. And just to show you how weak a champion George Foreman was at that point, he then went on to fight Axel Schultz. And I remember this fight very clearly, the Axel Schultz fight. That was after Foreman beat Moorer. It was his first defense in 95. Many, if not most, neutral observers thought that Axel Schultz won the fight. Have you heard of Axel Schultz? Those of you who are not around watching boxing in the 1990s, paying close attention to the heavyweight division, many of you won't even know who Axel Schultz is. Some of you who are newer to the game of boxing might recognize the name Axel Schultz if you're Klitschko fans. Because Klitschko fought Axel Schultz early on in his career. But Axel Schultz was no great shakes as a heavyweight boxer. He was a tough guy from Germany, but this is not somebody who you would worry about putting in the ring with an Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder. They'd take care of Axel Schultz, in my view, without too much issues, particularly Joshua. You know, Schultz was well schooled and he was tough, and styles make fights. That's why I say particularly Joshua. Wilder, with his wild style, might have given Schultz more opportunities to land a few shots here and there, but I wouldn't pick Axel Schultz at all over Deontay Wilder or Joshua. Let's just put it that way. And Schultz really should have been the heavyweight champion in this particular fight. Many people, if not most, believe Schultz won the fight against Foreman. Then Foreman fought Crawford Grimsley. Now, at this point, he'd been stripped of his IBF belt, and he also won the WBA belt, but he was stripped of the WBA belt for refusing to face Tony Tucker. Again, it shows you that Foreman was not a formidable heavyweight champion at this stage. He ducked Tony Tucker, so was stripped to the WBA belt. He refused a rematch with Schultz, in which, you know, many people think he lost that fight. So he was stripped of all his belts and he remained lineal champion. Then he took on Crawford Grimsley as the lineal heavyweight champion. I mean, have you heard of Crawford Grimsley? The only other time I saw Crawford Grimsley fight, other than the Foreman fight, was when he fought a guy called Jimmy Thunder. Right? Jimmy Thunder was a Samoan. He was either from New Zealand or Samoa. I think he was from Samoa. And he was pretty much a fringe contender / journeyman Jimmy Thunder, who had a weak chin. I remember he even lost to Derek Williams. Right? Jimmy Thunder was no great shakes at all. Jimmy Thunder knocked Crawford Grimsley out in about 2 seconds. I'm not even exaggerating. He literally knocked the guy out in about 2 seconds. Jimmy Thunder, this Samoan journeyman, knocked out Crawford Grimsley in about 2 seconds. You could probably see it on YouTube, all right? That's who Crawford Grimsley is. Now, let me see if I can find it here. There it is. James Thunder, right? Jimmy Thunder. 31-7 at the time. He knocked Crawford Grimsley was counted out, all right, KO, not TKO, counted out at 13 seconds of the first round. So literally he hit the deck 3 seconds into the fight. I said 2 seconds. I was 1 second out. Yeah, these are the people, and Foreman went the distance with this guy. This is the caliber of opponent that the lineal heavyweight champion was fighting in the mid-90s, Crawford Grimsley. Then he fought Lou Savarese. Now, to be fair, at the time, Savarese had a decent record. I think Savarese had beaten James Buster Douglas on Douglas's comeback at this point. Let me see here. Yeah, he'd beaten Witherspoon and... Oh, actually, no, that was before that. Okay, he'd beaten Buster Mathis, which was a decent win. And that's about it. Buster Mathis was, you know, kind of a fringe contender who was all right. So he then went on to fight George Foreman, and he lost a split decision to Foreman. All right? Guys like Lou Savarese were giving George Foreman difficult fights. That's how weak a champion George Foreman was at this particular time. Obviously, during George Foreman's prime, he was much better. Goes without saying. But at this point, as a 45-year-old man, he was a weak champion. And as you see, Savarese went on in his next fight after, losing a split decision to Foreman. In his next fight, he fought David Izon. And Izon, I remember, fought David Tua. Got knocked out by Tua in, was it the last round or the 11th round? He got knocked out by Tua. And Izon took care of Savarese in 5 rounds. No problem. Mike Tyson took him out in 1 round in Glasgow. Many other people took him out. So, this is a guy 45 years old, 46 years old, who was a world champion in the mid-1990s. You're trying to tell me that a guy like Foreman, who was way past it, who was having close fights with Axel Schultz and Lou Savarese and going the distance with Crawford Grimsley, you're telling me this guy can be a world champion then, but Joshua and Wilder would barely scrape the top 20 as contenders, never mind being world champions. I mean, talk about having rose-tinted glasses super glued onto your face. I don't know what people are smoking, right? The 90s was a great era for heavyweight boxing, but it's not as if there weren't weak champions back then, just as there have been in every era. Of course there were. And there was plenty of shenanigans with regards to the big fights that everybody wanted to see not getting made. Lewis versus Bowe never got made. Bowe ducked that fight, and years later, after Bowe had retired, the late Eddie Futch admitted that it was him who blocked the Riddick Bowe-Lennox Lewis fight. And interestingly, at the time, most Americans, including the American press, believed Rock Newman, Riddick Bowe's manager, and believed Riddick Bowe, because Rock Newman and Riddick Bowe were running around saying that Lennox Lewis was ducking them. Extraordinary. They were running around talking about Lewis is ducking us, when years later, Eddie Futch comes out and says, well, I was the one who blocked the fight. And of course, Riddick Bowe threw his WBC belt in the garbage, in the trash, in the bin, to avoid fighting Lewis, who was his mandatory challenger at the time. How can you do something like that and then claim the man's ducking you? That was going on in the 1990s. If that happened today, can you imagine the uproar there would be? Oh, this is a terrible era. You got guys throwing WBC belts in the bin to avoid mandatory challengers. What a terrible era. Well, that was going on in the 1990s. And the 1990s was a great era, but there was still funny business going on in that era. There was still ducking going on. There was still fans who were very frustrated because a lot of the big fights took a very long time to make. That was going on. But you got to take the rough with the smooth, because as much as there was funny business going on and there was weak champions, there was also good champions. There was also the incredible trilogy between Holyfield and Bowe. There was also massive upsets. Holyfield beating Tyson, Tyson's comeback, people thinking that Tyson would take over the division again, only to get beaten by Holyfield, and had 2 fights with Holyfield. There was obviously Lewis involved in a lot of tough fights. His fight with Frank Bruno was a tough fight. He got upset by Oliver McCall. He came back. He beat McCall in a rematch. He went on to beat Holyfield. There was a lot of drama. There was a lot of ups and downs. That's what made the 1990s so good, was all the drama, was all the champions losing. Holyfield, when he beat Riddick Bowe in the rematch, then he lost to Michael Moorer. It was like a game of musical chairs, It was an unstable division. You see, and this is one of the things about the boxing journalists, the boxing press in the 1990s, is they wanted stability in the division. They were basically yearning for a time when the heavyweight division would be dominated by one man. You see, because they had just come out, or boxing had just come out of the Mike Tyson era in the mid to late 1980s, when he was dominating and everybody knew that he was the man and head and shoulders above everybody else. They didn't like this competitive heavyweight division where people were going back and forth. So they were always criticizing the 1990s because it was so competitive and nobody was able to keep hold of the heavyweight title for very long. They didn't like this. When in retrospect, it was actually great. because it made the division more exciting. You know? So anyway, let me move on to some of the other heavyweight champions at the time. And I don't mean disrespect to these particular fighters, you know, as human beings. But I'm just being objective here. These were weak champions who were around in the 1990s. Francois Botha briefly held a version of the heavyweight title. He was later stripped because he tested positive for steroids. He fought for the vacant IBF heavyweight title against Axel Schultz, who I've already talked about. And that was changed to a no contest. You see, it says here, Botha was stripped for steroids shortly after the fight and was stripped to the title. So he won that fight on points and was IBF champion briefly, but was stripped. So he was a champion at the time. Francois Botha won a version of the heavyweight title. Now, no disrespect to Francois Botha, but are you honestly telling me that this is a man who you would pick over Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder? Are you telling me that even Axel Schultz is a guy you would pick over Joshua or Wilder? Well, these were guys who were in the top 10. These were guys who were fighting for heavyweight titles in the 1990s. All right? His fight against Axel Schultz was in 95. So that's Francois Botha. You don't know about Botha? He had a very long, extensive career. You know, I remember when he fought Michael Moorer on the undercard of Tyson Holyfield 1. That was on November 9th, 1996. And Michael Moorer gave Francois Botha one of the scariest beatings I've ever seen in a boxing ring. How they let that fight go on for so long was shocking, because he took a terrible beating in that fight. Terrible beating. I'm amazed he was able to actually recover from that beating, because it was such a savage beating he took in that fight. Terrible beating. And on the undercard of Tyson Holyfield 1, there was also another terrible beating that was dished out by Henry Akinwande, who's another champion I'm going to talk about. He fought a guy called Alexander Zolkin, who was a Russian southpaw. Big guy. So anyway, Botha, no great shakes as a heavyweight champion. He won a version of the title. And you're trying to tell me that Joshua and Wilder would, barely scrape the top 20? Come on, let's be realistic. Then you have the man I just talked about, Henry Akinwande, who famously now, people who have got into boxing in the last few years, or people who are big Fury fans, will know that Henry Akinwande was a guy who knocked out Tyson Fury's dad, John Fury. And let me see if I can find that fight here. John Fury, here it is. Fury was 8-2 at the time. Knocked out John Fury, a clean KO in 3 rounds at the GMEX Center in Manchester. I remember the GMEX. Anyway, Henry Akinwande, what are the highlights of Akinwande's career? I remember him actually fighting Herbie Hide in the amateurs. Was that in the ABAs? But he fought Herbie Hide in the amateurs, and that was a crazy fight, because Herbie Hide, tiny compared to Henry Akinwande. Akinwande, 6'7" tall. Herbie Hide was around 6'1", something like that. But as a professional, the highlights of Henry Akinwande's career were knocking out Jeremy Williams, maybe, for the WBO belt. Was it the WBO belt that he knocked out? I think it was. It wasn't a different version. I know Akinwande did hold the WBO belt. So he knocked out Jeremy Williams. He beat Scott Welch, who was a British level heavyweight. Some of you may know that he manages, or he has something to do with the career of Nick Webb. So Akinwande beat Jeremy Williams, Scott Welch. He got knocked out by Oliver McCall. He famously was disqualified against Lennox Lewis for refusing to fight. He was literally scared to death in the Lennox Lewis fight and held on for dear life and ended up being disqualified. His own team was screaming at him, like, what's wrong with you? Fight. He just held on for dear life and he wouldn't fight. Okay. What else did Henry Akinwande do? Let me remind myself what he did in his career, because those are the fights I can remember off the top of my head. Okay, he did beat All in Norris on points. That was after. And he did beat Zolkin. I've already mentioned that. Won a UD over Tucker. That was probably his best win, actually, in retrospect. Tucker was obviously very old at the time. Beat Johnny Nelson, but a lot of other people had. And Johnny Nelson, not a heavyweight, a cruiserweight. Beat Axel Schultz. And draw with him the first time. Beat Jimmy Fonda. So he beat a bunch of fringe contenders and stuff like that. A few decent names on his resume. But the point I'm making is, this is not a guy who was any great shakes as a heavyweight champion. And when he did first fight for the heavyweight title, was it the Williams fight? Let me see here. This fight was for the WBC. Knocked out by McCall. Where's the Jeremy Williams fight at? Man, I've lost it here. Some of you guys are probably screaming at me. It's there, Hatman, it's there. There's the Jeremy Williams fight. Yeah, it was for the WBO belt. Okay. So he fought for the vacant WBO belt, knocked out Jeremy Williams in 3 rounds, defended it against Zolkin. Have you ever heard of Zolkin before or since? The only time I ever saw Zolkin fight, I remember reading about him in the Ring magazine or KO magazine. There were some articles about Alexander Zolkin. I remember there was one edition of KO magazine or Ring magazine where they gave like the top 15 of the heavyweight division, you know, or the top 20 or wherever it was, or the top contenders. And Zolkin was one of the guys they listed. This is when he was still unbeaten. Shortly after that, he fought Akinwande and he got battered from pillar to post by Akinwande and ended up with terrible facial injuries in that fight. So, yeah, Akinwande beat Jeremy Williams, defended against Zolkin and Scott Welch. All right? That was a heavyweight champion in the 1990s. Now, to be fair, the WBO was not universally recognized as a legitimate sanctioning body in the 1990s. That has to be said, okay? So you can definitely dispute whether he was actually a world champion at the time because the WBO wasn't really recognized like that. But it's certainly recognized now. And Francois Botha and George Foreman, they did hold universally recognized versions of the heavyweight title. Foreman held, you know, the IBF and WBA in the 90s, and Francois Botha held the IBF briefly. All right? So these were men who fought for universally recognized versions of the title, and they were weak champions during their time. But yet you say Joshua and Wilder couldn't have held world titles in the 90s? Do you really know the 1990s? Did people just say this stuff without even knowing what they're talking about? Because that's the only way I can make sense of what they're saying. Maybe they just don't know the 1990s very well. So they're saying things without really having any knowledge on the subject. Anyway, Henry Akinwande was WBO champion back then. Michael Bentt was WBO champion in the 1990s. He knocked out Tommy Morrison in 1 round. And this fight, interestingly, was supposed to be a tune-up fight for Tommy Morrison because Morrison had signed a deal to face Lennox Lewis, which was worth $5 million or something like that for, I'm not sure if it was worth $5 million for both, but one of them was going to get paid $5 million anyway. And they were both going to get a handsome payday, Lewis and Morrison, for fighting each other. And this was supposed to be a tune-up fight for Tommy Morrison against Michael Bentt. Now, Michael Bentt was a good amateur in America. I believe he won the Golden Gloves a bunch of times and stuff like that. He was a good amateur. And he was actually born in the UK, Michael Bentt. I'm not sure if it says here. Yeah, he was born in London, United Kingdom. I think he was born in Dulwich. Was it East Dulwich he was born in? But he grew up in Jamaica and later on America, I believe, in Brooklyn. And yeah, he was brought in just as somebody and he was knocked out in his first professional fight, actually, in the first round. So as a professional, Michael Bentt really didn't do anything. Up until the point he fought Morrison. He didn't do anything before or after Morrison. And he was shot very early, actually. Michael Bentt might be an example of somebody who stayed amateur too long, took a lot of damage in the amateurs and a lot of damage in sparring over the years. Him and Dominic Gwynn, I think, were 2 guys who looked jaded when they turned professional, as if they'd had far too many wars in the gym as amateurs. They both had, I think, hundreds of amateur fights. Dominic Gwynn certainly did, and I think Michael Bentt had a hell of a lot of amateur fights too. And they were maybe damaged goods going into the pros. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. Bentt was brought in as cannon fodder for Tommy Morrison, and he turned the tables and managed to knock Morrison out in 1 round. In his very next fight, his first defense of the WBO heavyweight title, he was dominated and knocked out by Herbie Hide. And that's another guy who held a version of the world title in the 1990s. All right, now, again, people are saying Joshua and Wilder couldn't have been world champions or even contenders. And again, the WBO wasn't recognized as a legitimate sanctioning body. So let's just say these guys were top 10 contenders in the 1990s. Let's just say that. All right. If you don't want to call them world champions, fair enough. WBO wasn't recognized like that back then. But these guys were top 10 or perhaps top 15 contenders. So you're saying Wilder and Joshua couldn't have scraped the top 20 or could barely scrape the top 20? Well, these guys were in the top 10, top 15 back then. Herbie Hide, I think he would have been a serious cruiserweight if it stuck to that division, but he had ambitions to be a heavyweight champion. Herbie Hide always had a lot of heart and a lot more power than he was given credit for a lot of the time. But he had absolutely no chin as a heavyweight, none at all. He was very weak defensively, and he got knocked out a bunch of times, you know. So let's talk about it. He was knocked out famously by Riddick Bowe. I lose track of the amount of times Riddick Bowe dropped him in that fight. Now, Herbie Hide did well the first couple rounds, don't get it twisted. He did sting Bowe in that fight. But after that, he was on the floor, I think, from a jab from Bowe. And I remember one of the boxing publications in their post-fight report, they said that Herbie Hide should have employed a cutsman for his knees because he was crawling around in the canvas so many times in the fight. Yeah, he was dropped, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 times. It was a hell of a load of times in that fight. So he was knocked out famously by Riddick Bowe, and Riddick Bowe never really caught him that cleanly in the fight. I remember a big uppercut dropping Herbie Hide, but there were a lot of glancing blows which dropped Hide because he just had no punch resistance as a heavyweight at all. He was knocked out by Vitaly Klitschko, and I remember at the time thinking, hang on, the punch that knocked him out didn't hit him. A right hand hit Herbie Hide if you watch the slow motion. And then it doesn't hit him, it glances past his cheek, and Herbie Hyde's eyes are glazed over and stunned, and he like sinks to the canvas. But if you watch that slow motion replay very clearly, you'll actually see that Vitaly Klitschko lands a jab to Herbie Hyde's face and then follows through with the right hand, and the right hand misses. It glances past Hyde's cheek. It was the jab that knocked Herbie Hide out. That just shows you how poor his punch resistance was at heavyweight. A jab from Vitaly Klitschko knocked Herbie Hide out. And this is a guy who was a top contender during the 1990s, at least top 15. And you're trying to tell me Joshua and Wilder, a guy who's getting knocked out by one Klitschko jab, was able to be a contender back then, but Joshua and Wilder would only be, what, journeymen? Are you kidding me? Then Herbie Hide was knocked out by the Congolese journeyman Joseph Chingangu. I remember this. A big left hook, I think it was, that finished Hide. Dropped him heavily. He did later on avenge the loss to Chingangu, but he was knocked out by Joseph Chingangu. Herbie Hide was also knocked out in sparring by Danny Williams with a jab, from what I remember. He later on lost this fight to this guy whose name I can't pronounce. Right? To be fair, it was a cut caused by a clash of heads. Then he went on to have a pretty decent streak, really, mainly at domestic level as a cruiserweight. You know, domestic level in various different countries, but certainly not world level for the most part. As a cruiserweight, and yeah, if he'd stayed at cruiserweight his whole career, he could have done something, done a lot more in terms of winning world titles and stuff like that, in my opinion. But as a heavyweight, come on, man. Herbie Hide would not be shaking up the heavyweight division today. Let's be real. Let's be real. And then finally, let's talk about Bert Cooper. The reason I bring Bert Cooper up, Cooper was a journeyman. First of all, he was a contender at cruiserweight. So this is a pumped up cruiserweight, all right? But he was a journeyman heavyweight. And you can see by the record there. He was someone who fought a lot of the top guys, either before they became world champion, or in the case of Evander Holyfield, when Holyfield was world champion. And just to give you, and by the way, Bert Cooper was a tremendous puncher. That has to be said about him. He was a tremendous puncher. Many fighters, many top fighters have said that Bert Cooper was the hardest puncher they ever stepped in the ring with. Ray Mercer fought Lennox Lewis. Ray Mercer fought Tommy Morrison. Ray Mercer fought Vladimir Klitschko. Ray Mercer turned around and said on several occasions that the hardest punchers he was ever in the ring with were Bert Cooper and Tommy Morrison, that nobody else hit him harder than those guys. Oliver McCall, who was Mike Tyson's sparring partner for many, many years, said that Bert Cooper hit him harder than Mike Tyson ever did. And Bert Cooper sparred Oliver McCall. They never actually fought in a professional fight, but he said Cooper hit him in sparring harder than Tyson ever hit him. So that does have to be said about Bert Cooper. He was a tremendous puncher, but he didn't have a particularly good delivery system at top level. He wasn't able to get his big punches on and make them count most of the time when he fought the top guys. And he was usually on the receiving end of bad beatings, you know, whenever he stepped up. This guy, Bert Cooper, would not be, you know, dominating the heavyweight division today, but he very nearly won the heavyweight title in Atlanta, Georgia, as a late substitute against Evander Holyfield. And that was back in 1991. Now, originally, Holyfield was supposed to fight Mike Tyson on that date, all right? And I think it wasn't supposed to be in Atlanta, Georgia. It was supposed to be at a different venue when it was going to be Tyson. But once Tyson had to pull out of the fight because of his situation with Desiree Washington, where he ended up, you know, going to prison for rape. Because of that, Holyfield was then supposed to fight Francesco Damiani. And that's when the event was moved to Atlanta, Georgia, which is where Holyfield was based out of. Holyfield's originally from Alabama, but he was billed out of Atlanta, Georgia, and he lived in Atlanta, Georgia for, you know, much of his professional career. So the Damiani fight was supposed to go ahead, but Damiani got injured. I believe it was an injury from what I remember. And in stepped Bert Cooper as a very late replacement. And as I say, Bert Cooper, a journeyman, very limited experience, and he nearly knocked Holyfield out in the second round. He hurt Holyfield very badly, and he had Holyfield in all sorts of trouble. And that shows you how valuable punching power can be, because Bert Cooper really was leagues and leagues and leagues below Evander Holyfield in terms of skill and class. He was nowhere near in Holyfield's level. But because he had the punching power, he nearly won the heavyweight title. Because Holyfield got lackadaisical, he allowed Cooper to get too close to him. Bam! One right hand on the chin, and Holyfield was seeing stars. You know? And again, what if you put a Deontay Wilder in with Holyfield? What if you put a Joshua in with Holyfield? Holyfield surely wouldn't be as lackadaisical against those guys. But, you know, I'm sure that Deontay Wilder certainly hits as hard as Bert Cooper, if not harder. In fact, I would definitely suggest that Deontay Wilder hits harder than Bert Cooper. I think Deontay Wilder is historically a tremendous puncher. When I mean historically, I'm talking about you put Deontay Wilder in any era and he would be one of, if not the hardest puncher in any era. I think Wilder's punching power is phenomenal. You can talk all you want about his lack of technique and his windmilling and all that kind of stuff. Fine, that's cool. That's fair criticism. But his punching power is tremendous. And he does have a good delivery system. And Deontay Wilder is consistent with landing his powerful right hand. All right? So imagine if Deontay Wilder had landed on Holyfield. I know it's easier said than done, but Holyfield was never the slickest guy. He was never the most difficult guy to hit. It wasn't that easy to hit clean a lot of the time, but anyway, you look at Bert Cooper's resume even before he fought Holyfield. He'd been knocked out by Reggie Gross. This guy fought Mike Tyson, Reggie Gross, and he was a hardcore criminal, Gross. He ended up going to prison for murder. As a cruiserweight, Bert Cooper did beat Henry Tillman. It was a good win for him. And he was actually mandatory challenger for Holyfield's cruiserweight title, come to think of it. Bert Cooper was mandatory challenger for Holyfield's cruiserweight title, but that fight never happened because Holyfield moved up to pursue his heavyweight career. He did beat Willie DeWitt. That was a decent win. Lost to Carl the Truth Williams. At this point, Williams was past his best. Bigfoot lost to him. Bigfoot Everett Martin. That's not Tommy Morrison, by the way. That's Tony Morrison. Knocked out by Nate Miller. Retired in the Nate Miller fight. I remember Nate Miller. He was a decent cruiserweight back in the days. That was for the NABF cruiserweight title. Retired in 6. Was stopped by Foreman. I remember the Foreman fight. Did have a decent win over WOULDN Norris. Norris was when I talk about the greatest cruiserweights of all time, Norris is somebody who should be mentioned. This fight was actually a heavyweight, but Norris was best as a cruiserweight. And he was a cruiserweight champion for a long time. And he is the brother of Terry Norris, was WOULDN Norris. And WOULDN Norris was a good boxer, actually. Not as exciting as his brother, Terry, but WOULDN Norris was a good boxer. And definitely one of the better cruiserweight champions over the years. Although, maybe the cruiserweight division was pretty weak when WOULDN Norris was at the top. But, he did his thing at the time, WOULDN Norris. So that was a good win at heavyweight for Bert Cooper, but not a cruiserweight. Lost to Ray Mercer. I remember the Mercer fight. The Mercer fight was a vicious fight, actually. They went toe-to-toe. Knocked out by Riddick Bowe in 2 rounds. Remember, this is all before the Holyfield fight. He's had a whole heap of losses before going into the Holyfield fight. And then finally fights Holyfield. And after Holyfield, it continues. He gets knocked out by Michael Moorer. The Moorer fight was a really good fight, actually. Both guys hit the canvas on multiple occasions. That was a really good fight. Losing to an absolutely ancient Mike Weaver. This is really when he was on the way down. Knocked out by Corey Sanders. I remember that fight. Bert Cooper turned his back to Corey Sanders in that fight. He was down heavily, and he was under a barrage of punches from Corey Sanders, and Corey Sanders' very fast hands. Bert Cooper turned away. And it's not the first time that Bert Cooper turned away in fights. He turned away several times in fights. Went on to lose loads and loads and loads of other fights. So anyway, this guy nearly won the heavyweight title against Evander Holyfield in 91. So was the heavyweight division so much stronger back then than it is now, given all the stuff I've just explained to you guys? And I could go on and talk about other people, Francesco Damiani and, even Tommy Morrison. Look at Tommy Morrison. No disrespect to the dead. But when you look at Tommy Morrison, in terms of his reign as a contender, or if you want to call him a champion, because he was WBO and that wasn't universally recognized back then. But if you look at his record, Tommy Morrison, Morrison, there was a movie back in the days called The Great White Hype. And this movie was basically about how in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the media in America and a lot of the boxing public were yearning for a white heavyweight champion, because at the time, black fighters were dominating the heavyweight division, and there was this yearning, and it was quite public. People would say openly, we want a white heavyweight champion. The media would say it, fans would say it, and all this kind of stuff. And the movie Great White Hype was basically based upon Jerry Cooney, in terms of the main character in the Great White Hype. That was based upon Jerry Cooney and Tommy Morrison to a large degree. At least that was my interpretation of it, having watched that movie. And obviously they had the Don King character in there and stuff like that, who very much looked like Don King. I'm not sure if Don King tried to sue the makers of that film or not. I can't remember now. But anyway, basically in the Great White Hype movie, they have a white American heavyweight who is fed a bunch of tomato cans. And to be fair to that character in the movie, the white contender, he wants to fight all the top fighters. He believes that he's really good, but his team, unbeknownst to him, are swerving fights. Do you understand? And that really is maybe art imitating life, because I do think that there are many cases where the fighter themselves wants these fights, and the fighter themselves believes in their own ability, but their team are not so sure, and so their team are swerving fights on their behalf, and the fighter is a bit confused, and they're lying to the fighter telling them it's the other guy who don't want it, when really it's his team who don't want it, and they're keeping their own fighter in the dark about it. And that's basically what the Great White Hype was about. And Tommy Morrison's career was very much like that. When you look at the people that Tommy Morrison was fighting, I mean, the level of opposition was appalling. You look at these guys that he was, and Tommy Morrison, by the way, was managed by Bill Caton for much of his career, who was one of the original managers of Mike Tyson. And Bill Caton wanted Tommy Morrison to fight very much like Mike Tyson. He wanted Tommy Morrison to be the white version of Mike Tyson. He was looking for a Mike Tyson replacement because Mike Tyson had fired Bill Caton. So Morrison very much in his early days patterned his style on Mike Tyson. You know, coming forward with squared up shoulders, you know, the head movement, the hooks and all that kind of stuff. It was very Mike Tyson-esque in his early days. But he was matched against absolute road sweepers and tomato cans, as they call them in America. In fact, he was matched against a lot of the same guys that Mike Tyson fought, because again, managed by Bill Caton, who was Mike Tyson's former manager. But he fought these guys, you know, years and years. These guys were journeymen when Tyson fought them, most of them, and he fought them years after Tyson fought them. So he turned pro in '88 and, you know, proceeded to fight an absolute ton of no-hopers and journeymen. He did manage to stop James Tillis in one round. Tillis had 17 losses at the time. Again, this is another person Mike Tyson fought. I think Tillis had 8 or 9 losses by the time he fought Tyson. David Jaco, another guy Tyson fought on the way up. Steve Zowski, another guy Tyson fought. Lorenzo Boyd, another guy Tyson fought. Who else is here? Ken LaCusta, he beat him on points on the way up. He dropped him in the first and the third. Ken LaCusta actually fought George Foreman during George Foreman's comeback. Lorenzo Candy, another guy Mike Tyson fought. I mentioned Tillis. Pinklon Thomas obviously was well washed up by the time Tommy Morrison fought him. And Tyson fought him as well, obviously, as when Thomas was still a contender. So he'd fought absolutely nobody other than a washed up Pinklon Thomas, you know, washed up James Tillis, and an absolute tomato cans. Up until the Ray Mercer fight. And when he fought Ray Mercer, who was a legitimate contender, he was giving Mercer the business, to be fair, for the first 4 rounds. But then he got hit with a right hand in the 5th, and then he got brutally knocked out. And the referee really should have stepped in a lot earlier, because Morrison took some vicious punches in that fight, which he shouldn't have taken. Morrison, always a very brave guy, but he had punch resistance problems, especially after the Mercer fight. The punch resistance problems never really manifested prior to the Mercer fight, but maybe that's just because of the opposition being so poor. But then again, maybe it was a case of his chin being cracked against Ray Mercer, where psychologically he wasn't the same afterwards. And the boxing press at the time really slated Morrison for getting knocked out. You know, the boxing press at the time, anybody who got knocked down in a fight, they would question your chin. You know, this is how a lot of the boxing press were at the time. If you got knocked down or knocked out, it means you got no chin. Ridiculous. You know, like Ali never got dropped because they were used to Mike Tyson. Again, the boxing press. So many of them were such big Tyson fanboys. They looked at Mike Tyson as what a heavyweight champion is supposed to be. And Tyson was only ever down once, and that was against Buster Douglas. And that was after taking 9.5 rounds of absolute brutal punishment before he eventually went down. And Tyson had a tremendous chin, by the way, an underrated chin. That's one thing I can say about Tyson that was underrated rather than overrated, was his chin. He had a tremendous chin. The only time, as far as I'm concerned, that Mike Tyson got properly knocked out was against Buster Douglas. And I'm not talking about from a technical point of view. I'm talking about knocked out to the point where he didn't know where he was. That's what I mean by properly knocked out. Against Douglas, he was totally out of it. But when he was knocked out by Lewis, he was just demoralized and beaten up, you know, physically and tired and all that kind of thing. But he wasn't out of it when Lewis dropped him. He wasn't out of it when Danny Williams beat him. He was out of it, to be fair, against Holyfield in the first fight, but he was still on his feet. He never went down in the Holyfield fight other than in the 6th round when he got dropped with a left hook to the chest. All right, but from the headshots, he was never down from any Holyfield headshots. The only time he was down and seriously hurt, in my opinion, in the fight was in the Buster Douglas fight. So anyway, the press were very harsh on anybody who was getting knocked out back then, and they would just be on you saying, oh, you're chinny, you know. But anyway, in the case of Tommy Morrison, it was justified. But I do wonder whether all the press constantly slating Tommy Morrison for having no chin following the Mercer fight, I wonder whether that actually had a psychological effect on Tommy Morrison. Because after that, his chin seemed to get worse. Because he took shots from Mercer before the 5th round, you know, without going down or his knees buckling or anything like that. But later on in Tommy Morrison's career, he would go down from fairly innocuous punches. So I do wonder whether all that hounding that he got from the press and wherever he would go, you know, members of the public were saying, oh, you got no chin and all this kind of stuff. I wonder whether that had a subconscious psychological effect on Tommy Morrison and that actually messed up his punch resistance even more. You know, things like that can happen. People will dismiss that and say, oh, come on, that's silly. No. That can happen to people. Where because they start to believe that they have a weak chin, their body will react negatively when they get hit on the chin. A lot of this stuff is about belief, you know? It's not like if you genuinely have a weak chin, you can believe it and then it'll become better. But what I'm saying is if your chin is at a certain level, if you're constantly obsessing about having a weak chin, that can actually weaken your chin. And I do wonder whether that happened with Tommy Morrison. But anyway, I digress. He came back after the Ray Mercer fight for the W, you know, when he lost that fight for the WBO belt. He fought a bunch of no-hopers again. He did fight Joe Hip. Joe Hip was one of the few Native American boxers that you've ever seen. Joe Hip was a Native American fighter. And by the way, it's another thing. During the mid-1990s, the heavyweight division was so weak at one point in terms of so shallow, so devoid of content. Because obviously you had Lennox Lewis and Bowen Holyfield who were quality, and Michael Moorer. But outside of them, there was very, very little about. In the early 1990s to the mid-90s, there was very, very little about. And so Joe Hip was in the top 10. Yeah, Joe Hip was in the top 10. Garing Lane, who was a journeyman, a fat journeyman, he was in the top 10 at one point in the heavyweight division. And I mean universally, virtually in the top 10. I'm not saying every sanctioning body had him ranked, but certainly the Ring magazine at one point and what have you, it was either the Ring or KO magazine had him ranked. And, you know, Joe Hip and Garing Lane were top 10 contenders at a certain time in the heavyweight division. You trying to tell me Joshua and Wilder couldn't have been top 10? Give me a break. All right, Joe Hip was a tough guy, and he actually managed to break Tommy Morrison's jaw, and Joe Hip's cheekbone was shattered in the fight. Hip, not a very good fighter, needless to say, Native American, but a very tough man. That, you know, I'll definitely say that for him. So he took on some nondescript opposition, took on a way over the hill, washed up Carl Williams, who dropped Tommy Morrison. Morrison was down twice in the 5th round, as you see there. Managed to get up off the floor and stop Carl Williams. Then he went on and beat the strudel out of... he beat the crap out of George Foreman. Actually stole a line there from Don King. Because Don King once said that Axel Schultz beat the strudel out of George Foreman. Axel Schultz being German, obviously. That's where the strudel reference comes from. So, yeah, he managed to beat Foreman, which was probably his best ever win. Beating an ancient George Foreman. A 44 or 45-year-old George Foreman at the time. And he did a good job in that fight, Morrison. He did some hit and hop it stuff. And I think it surprised Foreman because Morrison had never fought on the back foot from what I can remember prior to the Foreman fight. Now, Morrison did use his legs quite a lot as an amateur. He was able to move around and stuff like that. If you ever watched Tommy Morrison versus Ray Mercer in the amateurs, Morrison was moving around. But as a professional, Tommy Morrison, as I say, had been built up as kind of like a Mike Tyson clone, you know, the white Mike Tyson. That's what his manager Bill Caton wanted him to be. And so going into the Foreman fight, Foreman was expecting Morrison to come at him. And he thought that would play into his hands and he'd get Morrison with one of them big uppercuts and whatnot. But Morrison flipped the script on him and actually, in the words of the boxing press at the time, Morrison ran all night. He did some hit and hop it stuff and just outboxed George Foreman to a decision. He beat the crap out of Foreman, really. He unloaded some tremendous combinations on him and, yeah, won the fight quite handily on the cards. Then he came back and fought, you know, he was WBO champion again. Tommy Morrison at this point, this was for the vacant WBO belt. He then fought a guy called Tim Tomaszek. Have you ever heard of him? This is who Tommy Morrison was defending his WBO belt against in his first defense. Tim Tomaszek, a guy who was 35-10. This is in the 1990s, 93. Yeah? Then he was knocked out by Michael Bentt. I've already talked about that. So this is Tommy Morrison. Again, no disrespect. The guy's dead now. He's no longer with us. No disrespect to him. But Tommy Morrison would not be dominating the heavyweight division today. He was a guy who struggled to hold a shot. He was a guy by today's standards who was small, not the most durable, not the greatest defense. Definitely had a lot of heart and definitely had big power himself. He had a tremendous left hook, Tommy Morrison. Tremendous left hook. And if you want to see a dramatic heavyweight fight, go watch Tommy Morrison against Razor Ruddock. That was a hell of a fight. A hell of a fight. How Razor Ruddock managed to get up from the left hook that Tommy Morrison dropped him with in the final round of the contest. I don't mean the final round of the contest as in the final scheduled round. I mean the round in which the stoppage occurred, which was the 6th. How Razor Ruddock managed to get up from that knockdown in the 6th, I will never know. Because it looked like Razor Ruddock was out cold. It looked like he was dead when he got hit by that Tommy Morrison left hook. But somehow he got up at about 3. And Razor Ruddock had a habit of getting dropped extremely heavily, but getting up very quickly from extremely heavy knockdowns. He did it against Bone Crusher Smith as well, when he went down very heavily against Smith, but he was up very quickly. You know? He was up fairly quickly against Lewis, when Lewis dropped him heavily in the first round. But never as quick as he was. I couldn't believe how quickly he got up against Morrison, because the way he went down, you would never imagine a guy going down like that would get up. But somehow he did. And then the referee, did he give him a standing count and then stopped him on his feet? I think that's how it went. Yeah. And he protested the stoppage. But that was a tremendous heavyweight slugfest. That's when both of them were past their best. Ruddock was past his best and Morrison was past his best, but a tremendous fight if none of you have ever seen it. So anyway, bringing it right back around to what I was originally talking about. I don't know where people are going when they say that Deontay Wilder and Joshua would have just been journeymen in the 1990s. They would have struggled to scrape the top 20. Where are you going with this? Because I've just shown you numerous fighters who were top contenders and held versions of the heavyweight title in the 1990s. And none of them were particularly great fighters. None of them were people who you would pick to dominate the heavyweight division today. In fact, the vast majority of people would pick Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua to beat the guys that I've just mentioned. So, it is what it is. Anyway, hopefully you guys have found this video interesting. Drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel. I've mentioned this in videos before, but this whole rose-tinted glasses thing can get out of hand, where people just have an unrealistic view of the past. And it's so ironic. Again, I've mentioned this many times before. It's just so ironic to me, because back in the 1990s, the critics were doing the exact same thing that critics today are doing. They were rubbishing the division. That's what they were doing back then. I remember it very well. I've mentioned Mike Katz a bunch of times, but there were other boxing journalists who were just constantly trashing the heavyweight division, saying it's terrible, it's in an awful state, it's in the doldrums, we can't wait for Tyson to come back and sort this mess out. Well, Tyson couldn't sort the mess out. Why? Because the heavyweight division wasn't as weak as those journalists were making it out to be. They were deluded. They were not being realistic. Actually, what was taking place is you had some very, very good fighters who were all around the same kind of skill level or ability level. That's what you actually had. It wasn't a case where the only serious fighter in the division, the only real top, historically great heavyweight in the division had left, and then the mice had come out to play, and all these, poor caliber heavyweight champions were all swapping wins and losses. That's not what it was. What it was is Mike Tyson was actually around in a relatively weak era. That's why he managed to dominate the way that he did. And what happened is after Tyson went to prison, some heavyweights who were on his kind of level emerged. The likes of Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, maybe even Riddick Bowe. These guys emerged after Tyson went to prison. Lennox Lewis was just, I don't know what he was, maybe 11 or 9-0, 10-0 when Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas. Lennox Lewis had only just turned pro when Tyson lost to Douglas. Holyfield, well, we know what was supposed to happen. He was mandatory challenger for Mike Tyson, and he was supposed to fight Mike Tyson after Tyson beat Douglas, but Tyson never ended up beating Douglas. So Holyfield didn't get the fight at the time. So, yeah, and even Razor Ruddock, who gave Mike Tyson two of his toughest fights. Razor Ruddock was supposed to fight Mike Tyson previously, when Tyson was still world champion. Yeah? And they still would have been tough fights for Tyson when he was champion. So it's not Tyson's fault. Tyson fought the best guys who were around at the time in his era. Right? But it just so happened to be a relatively weak era, and the better fighters who could have competed with him didn't come along until after Tyson went to prison. It didn't emerge, on the world stage until after Tyson went to prison, or at least after Tyson had lost to Buster Douglas. So that's really what was going on. But as I say, the critics didn't see it that way at the time, and they were heavily, heavily critical of the heavyweight division. They were trashing Lennox Lewis, they were trashing Holyfield, trashing all these different fighters. And that's what I see today with so many critics. Just trashing the division. Oh, it's terrible, and these guys would have never lasted back in the days, and take them rose-tinted glasses off of your face. If you can. Go to the hospital or whatever you have to do and get them rose-tinted glasses that you super glued on removed safely. And enjoy the heavyweight division for what it is right now. We don't know at the end of the day how the likes of Joshua and Wilder would have fared against Tyson and Lewis and, prime Klitschko, prime Ali, we don't know for a fact how they would have fared against those guys. We can theorize and give our opinion, but we don't know. We're never going to see those fights. It's impossible. So what you should do is enjoy the heavyweight division as it is right now. Do we have a competitive heavyweight division? Yes, we do. Do we have big punchers? Yes, we do. Do we have some very good boxers? Tyson Fury's there. A very good boxer. Yes, we do. Enjoy the heavyweight division as it is now. Stop being so down and, oh God, but it's not like back in the days. Back in the days, maybe were not as great as you think they were. Great times, but I'm saying they were perhaps not so much greater than today's heavyweight division. Enjoy boxing as it is now. It's like I said in my recent video about Akoli. I'm more of a glasses half full kind of guy when it comes to boxing. Yes, I dish out my fair share of criticism. But generally, the way boxing is going, I'm happy about it. I'm happy about it. I enjoy making these videos. I enjoy talking about boxing. Because overall, I think boxing, particularly in somewhere like the UK, is in a great place. There's loads to be happy about. Some people just love being miserable. That's what it is. But me personally, I don't love being miserable. I prefer to be happy. So I focus on the positive things. And there's so much positive going on in boxing, particularly in the UK, particularly in the heavyweight division. So I think it's great. Anyway, Drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel, guys. It's happening. I'm out.